Welcome back to So Who Are You Really? Real Life Spirituality. I'm your moderator, Chris Lenning, and I am joined again by the hosts, Jody Lemieux and Bryan Winston. Welcome back, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Now, today's topic, we want to talk about the difference between habit and ritual. Now, I want to hear your definitions for each. Who do we want to start with? Jody, Bryan?
I'd love to hear Jody's.
So we were talking previously to hitting the record button, and Bryan's definition of ritual has been really helpful for the sole reason habit can be unconscious. It's a behavioral pattern, whereas a ritual is... Why am I laughing? Great question. Whereas ritual is a conscious decision on habits. And so the difference between a habit and a ritual is, are you conscious of your habit? If you are, then it becomes a ritual, that's something you engage in every day.
So question that I was going to raise is, habits can be both good or bad. Does a ritual have to be a positive habit, or could we have a negative ritual?
Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to interrupt here for the sole reason, is there a good? Is there a bad?
Oh.
I believe things in our life occur for purpose, for reason, and rather than giving them a label of good or bad, they are. They just are.
What about the words constructive and destructive?
I like those words, constructive and destructive.
So if my habit is to smoke crack, that's my habit. I like to smoke crack every day.
I'm going to use that as a soundbite.
That's not funny, but it's funny, but it's not funny, but it's funny. So let's say that's my habit, right? We can say that although there's a positive intention, my positive intention is to feel good. I feel terrible, and it's, man, I can't believe I'm saying this. Why? And it helps, and this is something that helps me feel better. But it also at the same time is destructive. It's hurtful. It's unhealthy. It hurts me. It hurts my my body. It probably hurts my mind. I don't know I just picked that out of a hat because it's the first thing that came up, and I thought, but it is destructive, although it has a positive intention to it. But whether it's good or bad, I mean, someone may say this is really good crack. Oh my God, what am I saying today? Right?
I agree with you, because habits can be either creative or destructive.
Yeah. Right.
So rather than using good or bad, we can use the words creative or destructive.
Right. And so if we go back to what Chris's question is about, like, if we replace good and bad with creative and destructive, like, can you have a destructive ritual? I think you could have. That's a really good question, Chris.
Well, if we use your definition of ritual as it's a conscious choice, I would say no. I would say a habit can be destructive because at one point it's unconscious. Unless we choose to change the definition of ritual and habit.
That's actually really interesting. What if we're into black magic and there's someone who wrongs us? And part of our ritual is that we think about the people who've wronged us and we curse them. Right? And that's our ritual. I think that's where it could, even though for me it may have a positive intention for me, that could be destructive. That's the destructive use of law. But if you ask me, I may think that it's helpful. So then I think we start to get into good and bad again. I think that's where it starts to kind of get fuzzy there.
You're putting judgment around it when you label it good and bad. Yeah.
But wouldn't you be putting judgment on destructive and constructive?
Well, destructive is something that breaks something down, and constructive is something. And that's the way I see it. It's something that breaks something down, and creative or constructive is something that builds something up. Like in New York City, this weird thing happens. If you live here, like one day you'll be walking and you'll say, there used to be a building there. Buildings just disappear. Right? It's the weirdest
Crime
thing.
is out of control.
People are stealing entire buildings, skyscrapers. No, but But in order to build up a new building, they need to tear down a building that was there, but there's there before. So that was destructive to that building, but it was put in place so that something else could be built up and constructed there. So there could be a judgment around destructive, but there doesn't have to be. Like, we could see destruction as something that's necessary and something that's helpful as well.
Because it also follows the law of the universe abhors a vacuum. So when you remove something, when you destruct something, something has to go in its place.
Right. That's really interesting.
Because I was even thinking, what we're going back to his crack statement. So that would be a destructive habit. But even with that, you can still have the construction going because they're destructing, and people get to what they say is rock bottom, right? And once they hit rock bottom, hopefully if they've survived that, they can then start to build back and live a different type of life from that. So that could even be destructive habits that are going to lead to constructive habits.
That's a great reframe, Chris. Great reframe. My intent was to find something that was obviously destructive in a dramatic way. That's why it was crack. But what you're saying is that that could actually be continuing down that road could actually lead to something being very helpful. When people talk about rock bottom,
I just wanted to be clear. I'm not suggesting people continue to do it until they hit rock bottom, because there's a better.
I think what Chris is saying, people, is that if you're doing bad, start smoking crack, and it'll make your life better eventually. I think that's the quote here. Am I right about that, Chris? Is that going on the website?
It's not going on the website.
No.
Oh.
Edit, delete.
Yeah. But yeah, that's right. I think that's really a great reframe. I heard a story. It was on like NPR, like years and years and years ago. A guy wrote a book. He had gotten shot in the back, and it paralyzed him. And he wrote a book about how it was like the best. It was like the best experience of his life. That sounds really wild to say, and even me, I'm like, really best? Right? But he talked about how it changed his life in such a dramatic way, in the positive way, him becoming paralyzed. So we could look at that and say that's destructive. Something destructive or negative happened to him. But he's like, no, actually, it was quite different. But to bring it back again, we were talking about ritual. I think we started getting into good and bad and the nature of good and bad, destructive and constructive. If we get into ritual, your question, Chris, was, can you have a destructive ritual?
Yeah, and I think, that was my initial question. I think we kind of solved it. I mean, Jody's assertion is that because it's a conscious habit, that you couldn't have a destructive ritual, but I don't know, I'm sure I agree with that, Jody, because I mean, somebody smoking crack, as we go back to again, that is a conscious habit in some cases. It depends on, their situation, but some people consciously make that choice to do that routinely.
I was taking Bryan's definition of the difference between a ritual and a habit, because we first began this conversation. Well, is a habit something you're unconscious of, and a ritual something you're conscious of? So this is where I was first bringing us to, defining ritual versus habit. For me, they're interchangeable.
Yeah, they are. I think the distinction between them is that habits can be unconscious or conscious, and that rituals tend to be more conscious.
Yes.
Right. And selected, maybe to some degree. I'm choosing a ritual in order to get to this end.
So habits that have a purpose, like a dedicated purpose toward doing it.
I would say that's probably when it becomes a ritual, right? When they have a dedicated purpose to it, their conscious dedicated purpose to it. That's when it becomes a ritual.
So I can have a habit of drinking soda every day. Constructive, destructive, doesn't matter. But there's no end game to that. Like, I'm not drinking the soda to become more enlightened about something. But if I have a conscious thing where I'm reading books a certain amount of time every day, and I dedicate a certain amount of that time every day to read books on self-improvement and things like that, that would be a ritual versus just a habit, because there's an end game of improving myself with that.
I wonder if there's something here about short term and long term to some degree. Because in the short term, you having a daily soda habit, you're thirsty, or you want something
Or
sweet.
you need to pick me up.
So maybe there's a
Yeah.
right, or there's a pick me up, right? But okay, so there's another distinction. It seems like ritual more than one activity? Is ritual just one activity, or is ritual like a collection of activities? Because it would seem like if I think about my morning ritual, there's a collection of activities that happen in that, as opposed to one thing.
So ritual in the singular or ritual as the whole? I see.
Yeah.
So now we're defining ritual as a collection of habits.
I'm not sure if that's true or not. Just something I threw out there. What do you think, Jody?
It's something to ponder for sure as to, is a ritual something of a collective of activities, or is it a singular?
Mm-hmm.
Initially, I'm thinking it's a collective for the purpose of an enlightenment, as Chris is talking, for self-improvement, to alignment, to joy and peace, for me is a ritual.
But you could have multiple rituals in terms of maybe you have your health ritual, your spirituality ritual, your religious ritual.
You're gonna have a morning ritual, an evening ritual, an afternoon ritual.
2 a.m. when you can't sleep ritual. Yeah. All right. So I think we've pretty well covered this issue here, ritual versus habit. We want to hear from you. Just reach out to us wherever you find us. And there's links on there. You can reach out to us. Let us know what you beliefs are around ritual and what types of rituals you have. Bryan, Jody, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. And we'll do this again soon.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.